In charge of overseeing the NOPD's consent decree calls city leaders to court for questioning. A hearing tomorrow will focus on the NOPD's Public Integrity Bureau and whether the same standard was applied in their investigation of Officer Jeffrey Vappie. David Jones has more.
The mayor says the federal judge and monitors appointed by the Department of Justice are, quote, stepping out of their lane in questioning how the investigation into Officer Jeffrey Vappie played out. All this comes as the city tries to remove itself from the federal consent decree governing reforms at the NOPD for well over a decade.
The city of New Orleans is taking a fighting stance.
So this is about the consent decree, not about reinvestigating the Vappie matter.
Raphael Goyeneche with the Metropolitan Crime Commission says following the release of the federal monitor's report on the PIB's investigation into Officer Jeffrey Vappie, federal Judge Susie Morgan will have questions about whether it's holding all officers to the same standards.
If they didn't follow the provisions relative to what PIB is supposed to do when they're investigating misconduct of officers, it is also indicative of the fact that the city is not, and the police department is not in substantial compliance with the consent decree.
From the PIB side of it, absolutely handled effectively. It went even further, I would say, than most investigations have been.
Vappie, a member of Cantrell's security detail, became the subject of a series of Lee Zurich investigations highlighting the hours he spent both on and off the clock with the mayor inside the city-owned Upper Pontalba apartment. The NOPD's Public Integrity Bureau opened an investigation into Vappie and found 3 violations which led to a letter of reprimand. But federal monitors say the PIB committed 8 violations of the consent decree when investigating Vappie.
So the mayor is saying PIB went above and beyond. Part of what they did above and beyond was they asked the mayor to make a statement to them because this matter involves the mayor. There are numerous instances that raise the question whether the policies that the consent decree requires PIB to follow were applied in this particular case.
Goyeneche points to this statement by the mayor in March as an example.
I think that the investigation that has been ongoing is one that we can stand by. I know initiated by PIB, one that has been thorough, even one that I would classify as a witch hunt.
You know, here you have the mayor of the city of New Orleans calling a PIB investigation into allegations of officer misconduct a witch hunt before the investigation ever got underway.
The mayor is doubling down again, saying Judge Morgan and the federal consent decree monitors need to, quote, stay in their lanes.
Picking and choosing a particular investigation, again, outside of the scope. So what I will say is that I'm looking for bias-free monitoring and just bias-free.
The mayor says she herself will not be present at the meeting tomorrow, but that NOPD and city leadership will be there.